I think at moments like this, while we wait to find out about identity, motives of the perpetrator, we have to look at that and we have to ask ourselves the question, how did Britain become a country in which Jews are slain at their places of worship?
Is think, whoa, they are living rent-free in their head, but really they don't have a plan to deal with Nigel Farage.
The things that Keir Starmer would need to do to align himself more with the views of the public are what would mean that he can no longer be leader of the Labour Party.
Hello and welcome to the Spike podcast. I'm Fraser Myers. Delighted to be joined in the studio as ever with Spike's editor Tom Slater.
Hello.
And thrilled to have down the line, live from Washington DC, the Sun's editor-at-large, Harry Cole. Welcome, Harry.
Good afternoon. How are we doing?
Very good, thanks. We have got plenty to discuss today. We'll be talking about the Manchester synagogue attack, the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, and Trump's Gaza peace plan. Earlier today, on the day we're recording, 2 people were killed at the Heaton Park synagogue in Manchester. This was a van attack, a knife attack. It's believed the suspected terrorist also may have had a suicide vest. Tom, this is an absolutely horrific incident, but unfortunately in today's climate, it's not surprising.
No, exactly. I think that's precisely the way to describe it. It's both horrific and horrifically predictable. There's so much that we still don't know. There's just been a briefing from counter-terror police who have suggested that they believe they know the identity of the attacker, but not well enough to let the public know at this point. But everything that we know so far suggests that this is the grim, horrendous capstone to the kind of ambient anti-Semitism which has been building up, not just since October the 7th, but for many years before that. What we do know, as you described, is it was a ramming attack, seemed to target at first the people who were kind of standing guard outside the synagogue. 2 people stabbed to death. Then the synagogue was locked down. The assailant was neutralized by armed police as he was trying to smash his way through the window there, wearing a suicide vest. Whether or not it was a kind of grotesque prop or whether or not it was actually real, we will find out in some time. But in the climate that we're in, it seems to be grimly of a piece with it. Ever since October the 7th, there's been an enormous surge in anti-Semitic incidents. It hit a 40-year high after the pogrom in Israel almost 2 years ago this week. And this wasn't just graffiti. This wasn't just people saying mean things on social media. There was a 100% rise in anti-Semitic assaults. And I think at moments like this, while we wait to find out about identity, motives of the perpetrator, we have to look at that and we have to ask ourselves the question, how did Britain become a country in which Jews are slain at their places of worship? A nation in which really draws its entire post-war identity from taking a stand against the militarized, mechanized anti-Semitism of the Nazis, is now a place which for many years before now, but even more so now, British Jews are petrified of going about their business, of going to sending their kids to Jewish schools, of going to synagogues on Yom Kippur, the most holy day in the Jewish calendar. So a lot of questions about this particular crime, but also a lot of questions about the society in which this has taken place, I dare say.
Harry, what's been your reaction?
Yeah, no, look, I think I agree with Tom. There's a sort of crashing sense of inevitability about what we've seen. If you look at the rise of these sort of attacks across Europe, they have that common thread of, Jews going about their normal day in their place of worship. There's entire charities and organizations like the Community Security Trust that are set up to protect synagogues for this very reason. And it's a little bit like the old adage with the IRA and MI5, right? They only have to get lucky once. And it seems like that's the horrific scenes we're seeing unplaying in Manchester today. Is that, I have to say, there's something. Again, it's Manchester as well. It's strange because obviously the Ariana Grande attack at the Manchester Arena, that is a city that has suffered terror attacks in the past. It's coming back again. Look, I think Tom's entirely right about the climate. Look, these marches we see day in, day out, every Saturday in central London, central Manchester, central Birmingham, vile hate marches. That's what they are. And, this is a climate where people are denigrated and blood libeled and called, Nazis and murderers and genocidal maniacs. And, some switch flicks in someone's head and this is the natural reaction. It's awful.
And Tom, do you think there will be any kind of pause for thought on that wing of politics, that is constantly telling anti-Semitic lies about the Jews on a daily basis?
would imagine not. I mean, I think this is the problem, is that you have had this building problem of anti-Semitism in this country, which many people, not just Spikes, have been writing about well before October the 7th. It was always incredible the way in which you would see anti-Semitic incident, anti-Semitic assault after another, and it barely break out of the local press. Before October the 7th, Jews still made up about 0.5% of the population of England and Wales, and a quarter of the religiously motivated hate crimes. There was a cemetery in Kent which was desecrated 8 times in the space of 10 years. There's been this kind of grim flurry of stories out of North London of quite elderly Jewish men just being sucker punched in the street. And again, this is something that doesn't imprint at all on our national conversation. You know, all the while we were having, you know, Good Morning Britain debates about whether it was racist for Boris Johnson to make jokes about the burqa or Adele to wear braids during Notting Hill Carnival. I mean, it's both absurd and shameful at the same time. We talk about hatred and racism constantly, and yet the re-emergence of the world's oldest hatred in kind of intolerant Islamic form on the left, less so on the right, but nevertheless, just the fact that this is all was building before October the 7th, but since then the kind of reins have been off, as something which hasn't made anyone reassess, not just about their priorities in terms of where to fight bigotry in society, but also the recognition that obviously this new anti-Semitism is bound up with this hysterical, bigoted loathing of Israel, which has become a kind of proxy for loathing of the Jews, all the old tropes being resuscitated and just applied to the Jewish state rather than Jews explicitly, but we all know what it is they've been talking about. So you hope there would be some reassessment, but that hasn't happened so far.
Yeah.
And whilst you find yourself kind of reaching for the same old warm words about wanting to offer solidarity and so on, but it's got to go a lot further than that now. This is something where if you do even just occasionally talk about this issue, anyone who's written or talked publicly about anti-Semitism, what a scourge it is, the fact that it's coming back, people will often have the same experience of kind of British Jews coming up to you and thanking you for what is basically the bare minimum, which is to denounce what has been going on. We have abandoned British Jews to this hatred, and surely now is the point at which we actually do something about it. Whether or not it's going to come from the political class we currently have, almost certainly not, but certainly from society, that's the next step that needs to take place.
Definitely. And sticking with the theme of racism, the R word was used with quite gleeful abandon this week at the Labour Party conference. Keir Starmer called Nigel Farage's deportation plans racist. Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, said that Nigel Farage was worse than racist. And David Lammy insinuated that Nigel Farage had some sort of involvement with the Hitler Youth. Harry, what have you made of this? I mean, clearly, Farage was the ghost at the Labour conference. They couldn't talk about anything else.
It was the first Labour conference, I think, in about 18 years that I haven't had to go to.
Lucky you.
Quite welcome relief, but from watching it from afar, I have to say it looked nuts. Like, I don't know, the perspective you get from 4,500, 5,000 miles away. I was sort of looking at it thinking, what are they doing? Just at the moment, we're having a debate in America about political violence, the use of language, maybe not calling Charlie Kirk a fascist and a Nazi for the last 10 years by the left, might have not have seen the horrific scenes we saw in Utah, three and a half weeks ago. Yeah, look, I mean, when you are screaming Nazis and, Hitler Youth, and you have the Prime Minister of Great Britain using his biggest platform of the year to declare a politician an enemy of Britain, is think, whoa, they are living rent-free in their head, but really they don't have a plan to deal with Nigel Farage. And, they tried saying he was a friend of Putin's, they tried to say he was going to sell the NHS to Donald Trump, and now they've just gone with the old classic racist. And I think that word is losing its effects. We were discussing this on our show last night, and it was like, it's bandied around so much these days that it just goes into the noise. It's not like, 10, 15 years ago where, being accused of racism by a progressive, was essentially the end of your career. You were drummed out of polite society. These words and slogans are bandied around so much that actually I just think there's kind of wash over people. And the public are looking at that and saying, well, look, is he calling him a racist for, frankly, fairly menial reforms to indefinite leave to remain, of maybe asking, you know what, hang on, if you have indefinite leave to remain in this country, maybe every 5 years we should check you have a job, you haven't raped someone, and you check you can actually speak English. I mean, it's not exactly, this isn't exactly rivers of blood and Enoch Powell, is it? This is a fairly minor policy suggestion, which I think most members of the public, who actually read into the detail of it, would see as fairly reasonable. And fairly moderate. And if the immediate dismissal from the likes of your Lammies and your Starmers is, oh, it's a load of you're racist, well, you're kind of calling me racist. Then if I back that, and I just think they're also making the same mistake that the Democrats over here made. We had Donald Trump voters called trash in 2024, and he turned up in a trash lorry. He sort of leaned into it. Hillary Clinton, the famous deplorables row in 2016, and Kamala Harris basically dismissing Trump as a joke and a racist and a bigot, and look what it did for them, right? It didn't work. In fact, you argued it galvanized Trump's support in a way, and I just don't understand why you look at what happened over here with the Democrats, and you're a Labour strategist, and you go, well, you know what? I'll have a bit of that. It's bonkers.
It also works so well to stop Brexit, stop the rise of Boris Johnson. It's, a tried and true, tested, strategy.
No, exactly. I mean, it's a little bit reductive, but you could say the political story of the past 15 years is governments, but centre-left governments in particular, calling voters and even their own voter bases racist, and then being surprised that they won't vote for them again. I mean, especially in the context of the fact that Reform are hoovering up enormous amounts of support from people who voted Labour, certainly constituencies that voted Labour last time around. To double down on this and to, they make this fine distinction that we're talking about the party or the policies, we're not talking about the voters. That's not what people are going to hear in exactly the way that you say, Harry. And it's just become absurd. I mean, David Lammy running around saying that Nigel Farage, flirted with the Hitler Youth, an organisation which was disbanded 20 years before he was born.
Yeah.
I know it refers to one particular allegation which has been strenuously denied and some would argue debunked about him singing songs as a schoolboy or what have you. I mean, it's maybe you expect that kind of level of historical literacy from, David Lammy, a man who on Mastermind thought that, Henry VII came after Henry VIII and so on. But it's still, it's by turns very destructive to public debate in the way that we've talked about, but also it just seems like as if these parties have got a death wish. Like, why would you double down on a strategy which has dealt historic humblings to parties, largely the centre left and not exclusively, every time they've been tempted to reach for it?
And it's also, I mean, for the sort of layperson watching along who's not necessarily going into the details, people will be confused because Labour is also looking at reforming indefinite leave to remain. Now, the policies are different. Farage's policy would apply to people who currently have that status. But still, from you think, is it the sense that people will get is that it's racist when Nigel does it and not racist when Labour does it? Harry, I mean, one of the things that has been coming out is like Starmer's popularity is plummeting. There was polls suggesting that he may be the most unpopular or is the most unpopular prime minister since polling really began, more unpopular than even Liz Truss, bless her. Can he last in the job? Because the Andy Burnham challenge seems to have been seen off, but how long can he last, do you think?
Well, on paper, look, he's still got that whacking great majority, though, as we saw with benefit reforms, having a big majority ain't what it used to be in terms of party management. I think it's twofold, really, isn't it? It's is there anyone else that can take the job? Obviously, Angie Rayner, imploded. Sort of Andy Burnham gave us a short and delightful reminder of quite how crap Andy Burnham is. I'm old enough to see him do this, 3 times now?
The rest of the lobby seem to have forgotten how bad he was.
And worse every time. There is a real dearth of talent, I'd say, sitting around that cabinet table. And it's also a kind of better the devil you know, right? It's like if Starmer goes and Reeves goes, the people that are replacing them are not going to be better. It's not they're suddenly going to get like some sort of, there's not like a sort of figure waiting in the wings to sweep in. And, Rachel Reeves actually is kind of fiscally kind of fairly, competent and moderate in terms of some of the others. And you've got, the bond markets are looking at the UK, looking at how, in fact, we're spending more on debt interest now than we are spending on defence, education. They're looking at the rising cost of the NHS, which is going to basically take up half of day-to-day spending by the end of this decade. And, suddenly Rachel Reeves looks like a kind of moderating influence on the impulses of the Labour Party to splurge. So I think he's in a slightly stronger position than he looks, but it's going to be a slow slog to 29, 28, 29, whenever he goes, because ever he goes to the country, because, as you say, he's deeply unpopular. I don't know what he's going to do to turn it around. The public have taken, he's failed the public's sort of sniff test on him, and it's almost in the worst of all worlds. He survives, but he survives wounded.
Yeah, definitely. Tom, any more thoughts on Starmer?
No, I think it's one of those things where it's been striking how hated Starmer is, given how naff and insubstantial he is. It's an incredibly potent combination. Someone who's so milquetoast and yet elicits so much rage from various sections of society. It was interesting, that poll that put him as the most unpopular prime minister since they've bothered to ask the question. Number 2 and number 3 were Rishi Sunak and John Majors. So maybe there's something about that kind of out of ideas, sort of middle of the road type of character.
A tired administration, but he's only been here for a year.
No, exactly.
Really striking.
He's managed to get to as we talked about last week, the kind of Cones hotline period very, very early on in his tenure. And what's interesting is that there's obviously a lot of debate about what the government needs to do to try and claw back a little bit more credibility, either with their core vote or with the country at large. And you do think they're just in a uniquely invidious position because of the fact that the things that Keir Starmer would need to do to align himself more with the views of the public are what would mean that he can no longer be leader of the Labour Party.
Yeah.
And so that core kind of conflict and confliction is something that it's almost impossible to get over. But I do just always go back to the kind of collaying that happened after he was elected. The idea that we were returning to a period of wonderful stability, that in the words of Andrew Marr, we were looking like a kind of little oasis of stability in a very rupturous Europe.
It's so quiet now, isn't it?
Caitlin Moran in the Times was sexually aroused by prospect of
explicitly
Starmer's premiership. I mean, I don't know if she feels as fruity today, but
do write in, Caitlin. I know you watch, so please,
Yeah, it's got a little early here for that thought. Thank
you. Before we move on, I did want to raise. I don't know if people saw this, but in the toilets at the Labour Party conference, people were told that consent matters. There were these signs suggesting that you should have consent whenever you touch a fellow delegate, including before shaking someone's hand. So there's a sort of student union vibe definitely to the Labour Party conference, which you'd have thought the spin doctors would have wanted to not show.
Who's shown up to Labour conference if that needs to be the front? There's these lectures on consent. That's slightly alarming, but.
Let's talk about the Gaza Trump plan that was proposed this week. Some of the details include the release of the hostages very imminently. Hamas fighters would be given amnesty if they lay down their arms, and Israel would not occupy Gaza. It would instead be overseen by this peace board with Trump as the chair and Tony Blair involved as well. Harry, what have you made of the Trump plan so far? I mean, it has got agreement from the Middle East, but we're still at the time waiting to hear from Hamas.
Yeah, look, I think I think Israel have swallowed some fairly unpalatable moves there. The idea that the architects that still haven't had their heads blown off of October 7th will be able to sort of skip into the sunset and escape their crimes. Douglas Murray made a very good point yesterday that actually, the releasing of thousands of Palestinian criminals, terrorists, in return for the return of bodies and the 48 remaining hostages, that is a big move. Sinwar was one of these people that was released from an Israeli prison and went on to mastermind October 7th. So it is a big move for Israel. I think for Netanyahu, I don't think he had a huge amount of choice. I think it puts me in quite an interesting spot now that he has said, look, yeah, come on, fine, we're ready for a ceasefire. The global reaction has been amazing, though, hasn't it? The same people that have been banging on day in, day out, say we need a ceasefire now, going, whoa, we didn't mean a ceasefire like that. And the mask has slipped because they're now saying, the terms of this are acceptable. There's no role for Hamas. So well, yeah, that's the point. There is no role for Hamas. They've had their senior leadership wiped out 3 times over now. The remaining block of it is, who knows how long they can realistically keep fighting, and they keep fighting without support of the countries like Qatar, Iran. How long are they actually going to be able to sustain this? So I do wonder whether we will get to some sort of fudged peace agreement, but no sign of it yet. But they haven't come to the table yet. Are they good faith actors? Probably not. But I mean, what can we do? I was amazed how far Netanyahu moved on that one, though.
Yeah, no, that is very extraordinary. I mean, the reaction from the left as well, as you're alluding to, Harry, there has just probably been the biggest eye opener. Stop the ceasefire, carry on the genocide. As they see it. It makes literally no sense.
No, exactly.
It exposes their lies.
Yeah, if all they were interested in peace, then apparently this isn't good enough of peace for them. But I dare say we'd come to expect that. It's also been pretty fascinating to see the way in which this plan is kind of called the Israelophobic left's bluff in precisely the way that you describe, Harry. But it's also, I think, shone a light on Hamas in relation to the fact that there has always been this tendency, particularly in the West, to buy that their propaganda that this is primarily a kind of national liberation sort of resistance struggle, rather than what, if you read their founding documents, it's obviously just a holy war against Israel, the destruction of the state of Israel, Palestine to just be the sort of Palestinian wing of an Islamic caliphate. And whilst it may well be the case that there's more room for maneuver now because so many layers of the Hamas leadership has been taken out, because the fact that there's a lot of just older teenagers being put been handed Kalashnikovs and sent out to fight in a way that this organization is not what it once was. So maybe there is some movement there. It's certainly, sort of made clear that the picture that we were always presented about this conflict has never entirely matched up with the realities on the ground. There's obviously so many questions that hang over it, not only, whether or not Hamas are going to play ball, whether or not they're going to be honest brokers, they almost certainly won't be, but also what happens next. There is this kind of transitional arrangement, this idea you're going to have kind of technocrats drawn from Palestine but also elsewhere to kind of rule over the territory until such point in which it can more ably govern itself. But I think that raises a question which has always hung over this conflict, which is what is going to emerge within, broadly speaking, kind of Palestinian civil society that would be able to produce a leader or a party or a movement which was willing to admit that this holy war against Israel stuff was, if nothing else, a hiding to nothing, that was leading to the deaths of their own citizens. And that's one of the big questions that still hangs over this. But again, in terms of the prospects for the war to be brought to an end, in terms of the prospects for actual peace, as we've been talking about, it's fascinating that the supposedly peace activists have gone remarkably silent, if not enraged by what has been proposed in recent days.
Absolutely. Harry, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, just on Tony Blair, I suppose. It's almost like
Tony Blair and the Middle East don't normally mix.
Designed a peace deal just to wind up everyone, right? I mean, the guy's track record in the region, ain't great, to put it delicately, right? You can draw a pretty straight line from 2003 Blair to the siege of Raqqa. I mean, that is his Middle East legacy. Obviously, he wants to that not to be his lasting legacy. I wonder. I don't think anyone had Tony Blair as the protector of Palestine on their 2024-25 bingo cards, and also for America, for a president that campaigned on America doing less. Stepping back from its role as world policeman, having Donald Trump literally in charge of the Gaza Strip, I think is also slightly mind bending. But hey, if it works, it works, and he clearly wants to build that casino on the Riviera, doesn't he? So no, it was a slightly bizarre day at the White House with Netanyahu. There's a sort of anti-Semitic slur that Netanyahu's pulling Trump's strings, and Israel runs America. And actually, there's an amazing picture the White House put out of Netanyahu sitting there like a schoolboy being told off, while Donald Trump held the phone for him while he made him phone the Qataris to apologize for.
And he's reading from a script, isn't he?
Strike in Qatar. You just think that's not the that doesn't look like that doesn't look like Israel pulling strings to me, does it? So yeah, remarkable day.
Trump will get his golf course and Trump Tower and a digital ID for every Gazan to please Tony Blair. Harry, before we let you go, it would be remiss if we didn't ask you how US-UK relations are going? How is the UK seen in America? Because there's been all these tensions over free speech. JD Vance has been dissing us for that. Trump has been, attacking our energy policy and, our alleged, the alleged arrival of Sharia law into Britain. All of those kinds of issues. How is Britain seen? Are they worried about us? Because that's the sense you get from over here.
Yeah, they are in a way. I mean, the thing from here's my accent. They go, the first question is, what is going on in England? And it can be like bellboys, taxi drivers, people in supermarkets, barmen. Like, it's always, what the hell is going on in England? And the Graham Linehan thing made it really hard to put some nuance into the whole free speech debate when he was literally met off a plane and detained by armed cops. That one really did cut through over here. It's really fascinating what the level of detail that America knows about stuff in Britain, like the Cass report, for example, and the Tavistock clinic. People you wouldn't expect people to be that engaged on the detail of stuff. It really has cut through. What I tend to find, I think, is actually there's two big issues that people really care about and want to know about: free speech, obviously, and then the rape gangs. I mean, Elon Musk put that on the agenda here in a weird way, and I think the way I look at it is, the free speech issue is a little bit overblown over here. But the rape gang stuff is worse than people could ever possibly imagine. And so I think there is a sort of concern and shock, and there is a feeling that like we are a lodestar for America, and there is a fondness for the old country, and they're looking at it, and they're looking at it in a protective way, but also in a kind of selfish way. They don't want America to be making the same mistakes that Europe has, especially on mass migration. And, Donald Trump, I imagine there was a lot fruitier behind the scenes with Starmer when he was over here. He made a reference to the UN, to the fact you've been berating him on the beautiful North Sea oil for 3 days straight. He doesn't like windmills, sure, and he doesn't like his golf courses being affected by them. But I suspect it was a little bit more tense behind the scenes. But, Donald Trump's been on good behavior for the last few months when it comes to Britain, because he was, that unprecedented second state visit was very high on their agenda. It was a big deal for the White House. They are very, very, very pleased with that, and it was clear he was going to do nothing publicly really to upset that. But then, a week after his grip and grin with the king, like he's there at the UN saying we're on as you rightly point out, they're on a suicidal pathway. I think it was the delightful turn of phrase he used about Britain's energy policy. So I suspect now that state visit's over, and the carrot of that is diminished. I suspect we might see a bit more stick from Donald Trump. But no, it does come from, I think it does honestly come from a sort of a loving place. That's a weird way of putting it. There's deep concern over it, but there's also, a lot of it's overblown. But a lot of it's also actually pretty spot on. It's pretty hard to defend some of the things we're doing as a country to people that, as we say, from here looks pretty wild.
Thank you so much for watching the Spiked podcast. We'll be back at the same time next week. In the meantime, why not subscribe to Spike's YouTube channel and then click the bell so you're always alerted whenever there's some new content. Spiked is producing more videos than ever, from podcasts like this one to interviews to our series of polemics. You really, really don't want to miss out on it. Plus, to get your daily dose of Spiked, just go to spiked-online.com. That's our website at spiked-online.com.